So, welcome back for this final closing session of our Ideas Lab 2020. I'm happy we still managed to have so many people, so that's very good, but I think, let's say, there should be also a very good session now to discuss the future of Europe. Future of Europe, an issue which has been around for a long time. But there is a conference on the future of Europe which is now planned, and there is a commissioner mandated in the current commission to deal with this, and the plans are being discussed in the European institutions. And I'm very happy also it's on the agenda of the presidency of the Council of Ministers, which today Croatia has, and we have the person who's one of the leaders in the presidency who will be giving an introductory talk now, Andrea Metelko, who's State Secretary for European Affairs in the Croatian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So she will be giving an opening speech about how Croatia is planning the work just in general on the future of Europe, and then also specifically on what they plan to do for this conference and what they plan to do with an important event which is going to happen a bit later in the year in Zagreb, the Zagreb Summit, and all the issues around this. So we're very happy that Andrea could make it. We know, let's say, it's extremely difficult, let's say, these days, let's say, to have these people to come, certainly in the current circumstances. Andrea was here also last year, participated in a panel debate on more on the rule of law issues. She's now chairing also the General Affairs Councils, so she has already chaired 3 General Affairs Councils, so she's in charge basically as part of the presidency to prepare the European Councils, and so in this capacity she's really in the midst of the debate, and I'm very happy that she managed to make it and that she's with us and that she will participate. She will give this introductory speech and then participate in the panel debate. So with this, Andrea, please take the floor. I welcome you very much here, and thank you for joining us.
So thank you very much, Karel. I'm really very glad and pleased to be here and to be invited to give some introductory comments with regard to this panel, What Future for Europe? And I'm really very glad also to see that the other panelists have a very different background. So I expect really to have a very interesting discussion afterwards. First, allow me to say a couple of words about the Croatian presidency and how it goes. When we assumed our presidency, we knew that it came in time of great challenges and great changes, and that we would have our presidency at the beginning of the institutional cycle, at the beginning of the legislative cycle. We decided to have priorities grouped around MFF, enlargement. Also, Conference in Europe was part of our priorities set in our program. We knew that we would be dealing also with Brexit and also defining the mandate for the future relationship. So we knew that we would have lots of topics on our agenda, and for vast majority of them, and in particular having in mind that European Union, we are all living in a really very challenging world, and that the global landscape has changed a lot in last couple of years. So the idea of our presidency is to emphasize the need to have a joint action, to act jointly and united, and we prepared our presidency under the motto, a strong Europe in a world of challenges. So our 4 main priorities and the ideas we would like to promote, and we hope that we are really doing it during our presidency, which is now entered in the 3rd month, is the Europe that develops, a Europe that connects, a Europe that protects, and influential Europe. Talking about the agenda of the presidency, we were advised to be prepared for unexpected, and I think that this is something which each and every presidency is advised, but I think that our presidency, that in our case, this advice was really very well placed. namely our presidency goes so far in a very intense pace, and we have been faced with two unexpected topics on our agenda. One having the global impact. I'm sure that you can guess that I'm talking about coronavirus and all the developments and impacts it has all around us. And the second one is this migration pressure, migratory pressure, which we witness these days on the southern borders, outer borders of the European Union, particularly in Greece. And the Croatian presidency has been very deeply involved in both of those topics. When it comes to migratory pressure, we closely monitor the situation on the external borders. I'm sure that you know the President of the European Commission, of the European Council, our Prime Minister, together with High Representative Borrell, went down to the Greek-Turkish border, and afterwards we had organized the informal council meeting gathering ministers of interior, and today, just as we speak, we also have organized the Foreign Affairs Council meeting in Zagreb, and this is unlike it is the case when the councils are organized in the states having presidency. Unlike the practice is that these are the informal councils, but today's council is a formal one. It's been particularly agreed to be a formal one in order to be able to also decide and deliver concrete decisions. When it comes to coronavirus and all those developments, we are also very deeply involved in all the activities. Just to say that we have organized already two special councils, EPSCO councils, in the format of health ministers who have decided to take necessary steps in order to protect us from this virus. We are fully aware that this situation has a deep impact not only on our way of life, way of work, but also it will have and may have and will have some impact also on our economy. And this is why Croatia has taken this topic also to be discussed on the FAC Trade Council, which will take place later this month, and also on the ECOFIN Council. Talking about the real topics which we have on our agenda, one of this is of course the MFF, and we are fully aware that strategic agenda of our leaders has very ambitious targets to be achieved, and if we really want that these targets, ambitious ones, to be achieved, we need to agree on MFF soon. And while progress has been made, more time is obviously needed to reach the agreement. You know that we have had the special European Council, and as mentioned before, we had before it General Affairs Council to prepare the discussions. During our presidency, also one state left European Union. So we, in the course of our first month of our presidency, we actually ensured the orderly withdrawal of the United Kingdom from the EU. So all the ratification procedures were done in a proper time in order to enable the entry into force of the withdrawal agreement from the 1st of February, from which point of time also the transitional period started to be in place. Now we have agreed the mandate for negotiations for the future partnership with the United Kingdom. During the course of this week, there have been the first round of negotiations, and we'll see how those negotiations will proceed. We are really proud that on the EU side, we are able to offer comprehensive, ambitious partnership, of course, under the conditions that level playing field is ensured. And the course of the negotiations will show how far both sides are willing to go to reach the objective. On our side, we are glad to see that our mandate has been drafted pursuant to the political declaration which was previously agreed between the parties. When it comes to enlargement, additional important goal of Croatian presidency is Western Balkans and enlargement issues. And earlier this week, I was part of the Croatian delegation who visited Albania and North Macedonia in order to give them support in their European path. We visited this Monday, on the very same day when the European Commission was in a position to present a new revised, updated report on the progress these two countries have done on their European path, and taking into account the revised methodology which was proposed by the European Commission, and having this positive assessment by the Commission, which reaffirmed its recommendation to initiate and to start the negotiations, accession negotiations with those two countries. We hope that during the course of this month, on the General Affairs Council, we would be able to reach a joint decision on opening negotiations with those two countries. Talking about another topic which is on our agenda is definitely the Conference on the Future of Europe. We have put it on our agenda even before the European Council has tasked Croatian presidency to prepare the position of the Council with regard to the conference. And we have had extensive exchange of views within the Council on the position of the Council, which needs to be defined in order to enter in the negotiations and exchange of views with the other two institutions, that is European Parliament and European Commission, in order jointly to agree on the whole process. As you know, European Commission has made their position known in their communication. The same did European Parliament, and now it is up to these three institutions to jointly agree on the mandate. What Croatian presidency and the Council believes is that we need to have a joint ownership over this process, and that all three institutions need to be equally present and involved pursuant to their competences in accordance with the treaties. And of course, we all believe that not only national parliaments need to be also deeply involved, but of course, first of all, our citizens. We need to make this conference as a platform where our citizens can state their concerns, their views on the way in which European Union should develop. We in the Council have managed to agree on a number of topics. Amongst the other is that it would be wise to put policy first when we discuss the future of Europe. We also believe that discussion on the future of Europe should not distract us from implementation of the strategic agenda our leaders agreed in June last year. We also would like to see, as I said earlier, the deep involvement of the national parliaments. In any way, in order this process to become a success, we also need the widest possible inclusion of our citizens and to show them that their voice can be heard. And the idea is that all the core concerns of our citizens should be taken into account, and that we should find an effective way how to make positive effects when we draft and when we agree on the concrete policies in the future. The high turnout on the European elections somehow oblige us to take into account the position of our citizens in particular, and we are discussing that number of topics need to be on the agenda, including economic, social, political, demographic one, and that's sustainability, equality, competitiveness, fundamental values, international role of the EU on the global scene are all those topics which should be discussed during this 2 years process that we envisage. Let me just say that we see that our young generations are particularly attentive to topics of tackling climate change and environmental challenges, and we really need to take this topic in mind when we consider future policies. We see the European Green Deal as the vehicle not only for green transition, but also to enable economic growth. And this is why I believe that even Croatian presidency has put the Green Deal on the topic as an item to be discussed on number of formats of the Council, and this is the way we should go forward. Let me just end by saying that Croatia is the youngest EU member state, and we are really very glad to be in a position to hold the presidency European Council, and believe that by being the youngest, we can bring some kind of new perspective also to the Council and deliberations. Croatian citizens have high support for European Union. Amongst others, it is because our citizens do remember time when Croatia was not part of the EU. And let's try to promote these positive elements which Croatian citizens do have and do remember as the basic values of the European Union. Let's take them and share them with our citizens. And just my last words would be that we should all remember that EU is not only a sum of member states, but it is a union which takes the inputs of all member states and give it additional strength. So let's work jointly to make the EU even better in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. It was a very interesting speech. You covered quite a lot of themes already, and the theme we want to discuss in a moment. If I could invite the other panel members, we have Sophie and Veld, a member of European Parliament. We have Ivo Belet, who's head of cabinet of Commissioner Šuica, the commissioner in charge. And then we have Richard Youngs, with Carnegie Europe, a specialist in participative democracy, and also author of the book Europe Reset. If I could start probably with Sophie. I mean, there is a microphone on your seat. How do you see this from European Parliament? Andrea was referring to this agreement between the three institutions for a mandate for a conference on the future of Europe. How do you see this as a member of the European Parliament, member of the Libe Committee? What should this conference on the future of Europe achieve? How often should it meet? I mean, how many MEPs, for example, will be involved, or MPs will be involved? What is your view on that, Sophie?
Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for the invitation. On the conference on the future of Europe, well, that was set up in the aftermath of the elections, where indeed there was a record high turnout, which was mainly due to the fact that young people voted. And I think young people went to the ballot stations expecting that they were voting for parliamentary democracy in the European Union. But then the reaction of the governments was to go right back to the old system and choose the new political leaders in, horse trading behind closed doors. I think that was the wrong reaction. Now, I believe it is the job of this new conference for the future of Europe to come up with proposals to strengthen the European Union as a parliamentary democracy. But I have to be very honest, and this is only my personal opinion, I have some doubts. Because it may well be that the conference is going to come up with excellent new ideas. It will be very broad. There will be, this is the proposal of Parliament, something like 135 MEPs, and then I think 4 MEPs per member state, and the Council and the Commission, and there will be hundreds of citizens in panels being consulted, lots and lots of people. But I wonder if lack of ideas is really the problem that the European Union is struggling with. Isn't it rather lack of political will and lack of political courage? If I look at the situation that we are facing, right today as we speak, at the border of the European Union, what I see there is not a lack of good ideas on how the European Union should function. It's a lack of leadership. It is a Commission and a Council which are completely inward-looking and in panic, believing that they can, literally but also metaphorically seal off the European Union and keep the world out. And I think, in conclusion, the main problem that we need to address is the inability, mainly in the Council, to take any kind of decisions, because the Council has become completely paralyzed, unable to agree on migration, unable to agree on the budget, unable to agree on the conference on the future of Europe, ironically, unable to agree on the rule of law, unable to agree on anything, basically. So if citizens, by going to the ballot station, express the desire for a strong European Union that is able to take decisions, to act effectively, but also a European Union that is more democratic, that has more legitimacy, then, I'm not sure that a conference for the future of Europe with so many people is going to provide the answers. I think the answers lie rather in how we are going to reform the Council, but also it's also in the hands of national politicians. Do they want a strong European Union, yes or no? If they do so, they have to accept that there is a collective responsibility. They cannot pretend that it's still 1957, it's 2020. And the Council will have to operate in a different manner.
So you would expect personally that a conference on the future of Europe should have to make some tough proposals on reforming the institutions, which in fact the member states are not willing to take.
Well, I think that is, that's pretty much going to be the dilemma. Look, I'm personally very much in favor, and so it's one of the raison d'être of my political party, to promote direct democracy, citizens' participation, transparency, accountability, and all the rest of it. At the same time, I have the feeling that we have been devaluating parliamentary democracy, as if there is sort of real democracy and fake democracy. And real democracy is referenda, and fake democracy is parliamentary democracy, a little bit like this. And, I wonder, what are we going to tell those citizens? Because if we set up this conference and the citizens' panels, and then they come up with recommendations that don't suit everybody's wishes, then what? And there will indeed be, as you also suggest, I think that there's going to be a dilemma between, on the one hand, a lot of citizens indicate that they want a more, a union that's able to act. They want a more democratic union. But very often they also say they want a more intergovernmental union. And the two don't go together. Intergovernmentalism, by definition, is not efficient and it's not democratic. It is actually the biggest obstacle to the future of Europe, if you ask me. So that is a dilemma, and I don't know how this conference is going to deal with that. Because that is something that you usually only know when you've been following, like many of you, the workings of the European Union for a while. It's a dilemma we cannot solve easily.
Okay, thank you, Sophie. Very clear. I mean, we turn to Ivo. Ivo is a former member of the European Parliament. I think certainly many of you will know him. Now in charge of working on this file with the Commissioner in charge. So what is the Commission planning to do? How much will you be at the center of this whole process? And how will you respond to some of the criticism which you heard from your former colleague, Sophie?
Yeah, of course, at the center of the project, we assume that European Parliament and the Council will be the center of the project, and we, as mediators and as honest brokers, will be on board, of course. So, first of all, Karel, thanks so much. Thanks, first of all, for the invitation, and on behalf of Vice President Šuica, who's responsible for the coordination of the Conference of the Future of Europe, congratulations for all the work and all the expertise and the know-how that you've been bringing together again here in this CEPS lab. So, sincere congratulations. And thanks for Andrea, for the State Secretary, to be here. And good news that you're not been put into quarantine. So we are very much appreciating that. So what is the role of the Commission? So I think as Sophie has said, the European Parliament has done his part of the job by approving a very detailed resolution on the Conference of the Future of Europe, which is very inviting to all stakeholders. European Commission has agreed like a month ago on the communication on shaping the Conference of the Future of Europe. So those two, from those two sides, work have been done. We count on the ability and all the skills of the Croatian presidency, on you, Andrea, to trigger the parties within the Council to come as soon as possible, also with a common statement from the Council, and then first steps to take in the upcoming not days, but weeks, we hope, is that there will be a joint agreement between the three main institutions and, as the State Secretary has said, to invite the national parliaments, the regions, Committee of the Regions, even the cities to come on board and to join that joint declaration, to co-sign the joint declaration, to make clear that it's not just a project that is limited to the Brussels bubble, with all due respect, but we want to reach out. We want to break out of the cities, out of the capitals, and to reach out to all cities and villages all over Europe. That sounds very, very ambitious, but Vice President Šuica, in the citizens' dialogues that she has already been performing in now, so we're not waiting for the formal start, but we're already engaged in those citizens' dialogues. She's really going to the villages in Spain, in Latvia, in Czech Republic, everywhere, in order to listen to the citizens, not to tell the citizens what they have to do or in which direction the European Union should go, but to ask the citizens what do they expect from us. And you will immediately say, Karel, yeah, but we have been doing that. We have had 1,800 citizens' dialogues in the last years. So what are you going to do? Are you going to reinvent the wheel? No, not at all. The big difference between what we've been doing in the past and on which we will be building is that we want to install a real feedback mechanism, Sophie. We really want to take on board recommendations of the citizens via a multilingual European-wide platform, and then of course we want those recommendations of the citizens to be sent to the Parliament, to the Council and the European Commission, and to implement them. It's my last sentence in this first intervention is that I'm very pleased, in a positive way, surprised by the fact that in the draft, but it's not finalized yet, in the draft common position of the Council, in one of the last paragraphs, it's clearly mentioned that the member states engage themselves to take on board the recommendations of the citizens that would be sent to that via the feedback mechanism to the institution. So I think it's from an optimistic side.
An additional question: who will manage the entire process? Is it the Commission? Is the Commission the motor of the conference?
I think the Commission cannot be the only motor of this whole exercise, this whole project. This is, you already mentioned it, it's a joint exercise. Yeah, and the joint exercise of the three institutions, and with a clear invitation to the national parliaments, to the Committee of the Regions. We are very closely working together with the Committee of the Regions, with the cities. There was a covenant of mayors planned in 2 days before today in Brussels, which had been cancelled, unfortunately, because of the corona crisis, but together with the Covenant of Mayors, so it should be joint leadership, of course, with European Parliament and the Council also.
The Secretariat is
the driver's seat.
The Secretariat is the Commission, or not?
We aim at a joint secretariat of the three institutions in Brussels, with, in perhaps also, as the Parliament has proposed, a steering
Apparently
board.
That's a touchy issue because everybody is taking a microphone.
Yeah, touchy. But you can endlessly discuss about the governance of this issue, but we should, I think you agree, have a decision as soon as possible on the governance so that we can start working.
Okay, but can I first pass the floor to, I think, an expert in deliberative democracy, participative democracy, is Richard Youngs. By the way, Richard also cooperated in a project with CEPS on Citizens EU, on which the book, a third volume, was published exactly on Wednesday, I think. So you can probably say something about this as well, but also on your expertise, on the research you have done on how you organize such processes, or what is the outcome of such processes in member states so far.
I think we've heard that there's a reasonably firm consensus now that citizens need to be involved in this conference. The whole issue of democratic participation is much more firmly on the agenda at many levels of politics in Europe today than it was some years ago. What we found from our project was that the thinking and experiences about how to do participation in the right way has improved dramatically in recent years. So I think there's a much broader recognition of some of the things that have been mentioned, that if we're going to involve citizens, there needs to be a very concrete and tangible follow-through. The worst thing you can do is to ask people's opinion and then not follow through in responding. You need to consult a very representative range of different parts of society at many different levels. You need to give citizens the ability to shape an agenda, not simply approve or not approve policy issues that have been designed in a top-down way. And perhaps most crucially, it needs to be understood that participation, getting citizens involved, is not a substitute for parliamentary democracy, but somehow needs to work in tandem with existing representative channels. I think all those are fairly basic points. They're kind of firmly on the agenda. I think the danger is that democracy has become a little bit of a kind of motherhood and apple pie issue. Nobody's against it, but the devil is in the detail of actually how it's taken forward. And I think there everyone agrees with it in principle, but in practice, I think there is still some caution about how ambitious certainly some governments are in actually opening up participation. So I think there's a danger still, in my view, that participation could be quite cosmetic. I think we've heard that some governments still have what we might call a policy-first approach rather than a politics-first approach. That is the view that the conference should focus on 3 or 4 priority policy issues, and then democratic politics would kind of fit around those policy advances, rather than the EU trying to get its political processes right before it decides what it wants to do in terms of policies, which I think would be my preference. So I think in general, the principle of involving citizens is accepted, but there's still some real doubt about how much it will be taken forward in practice. And I tend to agree with Sophie that the conference is important for democracy in Europe, but it's not necessarily everything. It's not necessarily the most important arena. What we found in our project was there's a lot of democratic energy, a lot of democratic innovation going on around Europe at many different levels. That doesn't need to wait for 2 years while we're discussing the whole of the future of Europe. So I think one thing is the future of democracy in Europe. The other thing is the future of the EU institutionally. And then final word, perhaps most importantly, it's important to have the citizens involved in the conference, but perhaps more importantly than simply having a few citizens' agoras during the lifetime of the conference is the need for more permanent democratic reforms after the conference has finished. And it's not clear to me yet that there is a really strong political will to contemplate those kind of permanent mechanisms over the longer term.
What I remember from your book is that you said, let's say, the way in which this is happening today, or the habits in different member states, the traditions are extremely different. And what you research, let's say that in some member states, it's already well kind of, managed, and it's experienced, let's say, how to do this. Like in France, you refer to the run-up to the elections of Macron and then afterwards, but then in other states it hardly exists.
So it's very, very interesting. I think the situation regarding democracy isn't uniform. It's very different in different member states. The weaknesses that beset democracy are different across member states, and the more positive areas of reform and improvement are different across member states. So for many, many decades, there's been a long-running debate about different models of democracy in Europe. It seems to me that Europe isn't heading towards any single uniform model of democracy. What works in one country may be different from what works in a different country. So, but I think a concern at the moment is there's a lot of experimentation going on with different forms of democracy in parliament, in civil society, with citizens, at many different levels, but it's all a bit fragmented, and perhaps its effect is less than the sum of its parts. And I think perhaps that's where the EU level could play a useful role in kind of channeling this democratic energy, which at the moment is in danger of getting a little bit dispersed.
Okay, but Sophie, can I first pass it to Andrea, because Andrea wanted to react to some of the things, or what you heard, but also on the organization of the conference?
Maybe just to refer, yes, the organization of a conference is still to be decided among these three institutions. And this is, when you ask the question, what kind of conference we will have and what will be the governments, it's a little bit too premature to ask that kind of question. It is, as I said, left to be agreed among those three institutions. And we are really looking forward to getting engaged. And just let me also draw the attention to the fact that the European Commission has, in its own paper, offered its knowledge and its assistance to provide the various digital platforms all over Europe to enable citizens to participate in it. And then we can only just really welcome that kind of assistance or contribution European Commission is offering. We should also build up on the previous experience which we had, and I fully agree that democracy and enable our citizens to express their views is of crucial importance, and the idea of this conference is actually to enable it in each and every EU member state, and in addition there'll be this digital platform where you can sit wherever you are situated and then present your ideas. Maybe just a short comment on the parliamentary democracy. We all adhere to it, and I would say that vast majority of our states have a parliamentary democracy, meaning that the parliament has the power and the government is dependent on parliament. This is what we all embrace in our democratic societies. When it comes to the European Union, we should be a little bit more careful when we talk about parliamentary democracy, because you cannot just copy the structure and the relationship which we all have within each and every member state on the EU level. On EU level, you have various institutions which, with their competences, and in order to move forward, each institution needs to act and react with its own competences.
Sophie?
Yeah, I think this kind of also underlines what the problem is, also with this whole conference on the future of Europe, because you know, I think direct democracy, citizens' consultations can be an extremely useful, complementary part of democracy. But citizens' consultations can never replace political leadership and decision-making. I mean, I think that's also what went wrong in the UK. There was a problem with political leadership that was then outsourced to a referendum. David Cameron thought that a referendum was going to solve his problem inside his party. Well, and that backfired majestically. And I think we have a problem here because, you know, citizens' consultations and conference and everything, but everybody can see that the council is unable to respond to, I don't know, Trump, China, migration, budget challenges, rule of law. What's the council doing about Poland? We see the European Union is disintegrating as we speak because the whole judicial system is falling apart because the Council refuses to tackle Poland, to tackle Hungary, to tackle Malta. That's the problem. And if you say, well, you know, we shouldn't see European parliamentary democracy like we see national parliamentary democracy, well, that's news. Did people know this before they went to the ballot boxes at the end of May last year? 200 million people went to vote, believing that they were voting in a parliamentary democracy, and now we learned that that was actually not entirely true. Come on. And even this conference, if it's going to take, what, 2 years, I believe? I mean, the issues that we have to resolve them today. And they require political leadership and political courage inside the Council. Migration. There is a majority today to adopt a proper asylum and migration policy. Why isn't it happening? Because there is a minority of member states that doesn't want it, and the others are just waiting for unanimity to just magically emerge. Rather than taking their responsibility for the European Union as a whole, there is a problem. I mean, if you see how the Council functions, it's very comparable, I think, to what we saw with the impeachment process in the United States, where the Republican faction in the Senate was unable to tackle one of their own. And that is the problem that we have to solve, and the conference is not going to solve it.
Okay, we're going to see that. But Ivo wanted to respond on these issues about whether there's insufficient functioning of the Council and the Commission.
Yeah.
As a former MEP, Ivo?
Yeah. I wanted to react to what Richard said, and it has to is directly related to your question, Karel, about, and also what Sophie is saying. We don't have to wait until the end of the conference, of course, and the State Secretary referred to the milestones. So the conference indeed is meant to take 2 years, and then to land under the French presidency in 2022. But in the meanwhile, when there are concrete proposals and there is the pressure of the citizens, don't underestimate the pressure of the citizen, the power of the citizens. When citizens are asking, and it's clear under the German presidency, the Portuguese presidencies, those coming up, that indeed citizens are asking for really a robust foreign policy with regard to Syria, for instance. Why wouldn't the Commission come up in the meanwhile, or in 2021, before 2022, with a concrete proposal when the momentum is there? The same, Sophie, for migration, asylum policy, etc. So, as the State Secretary said, that is foreseen in the whole process to be rolled out after the agreement among the institutions, that those milestones will be there, and that the German presidency, that the Slovenian, the Portuguese, or the French presidency can take the initiative in order to go forward. Yeah. Together with, as Richard said, tangible results. If we can't guarantee, it's a delicate word, guarantee, that tangible results come out of the recommendations of the citizens, we shouldn't start this process, because it would backfire, as you rightly say. Yeah.
I mean, if I can ask Richard a follow-up question. I mean, of course, we were supposed to have, after this lecture, a lecture of Ziblatt on how democracies die. When I heard this panel initially, I said, apparently our democracies are alive. Or am I wrong?
That's a huge question. The situation regarding democracy in Europe continues to be very serious. In many places it's very grave. The challenges are very severe. Perhaps the situation isn't quite as drastic in a systemic way as many people expected 3 or 4 years ago. So I wouldn't minimize how worrying the situation is in some countries. But just to point to the fact that there is quite a lot of diversity and variation between countries, and that perhaps compared with a few years ago, what we are seeing is a whole multiplication of efforts to try and fight back and rethink the way that democratic processes work. I wouldn't pretend for a moment that we've found a solution or completely corrected the negative trends, but I think perhaps there's more of a balance in terms of negative and positive dynamics affecting.
Are there some countries where you're extremely worried, and others which you say these are examples from the work you've done with us?
I mean, if one looks at the Freedom House scores that just came out this week, one can see that, I mean, the Scandinavian countries are doing reasonably well, the Netherlands, and even if the fight back is not reflected in overarching democracy scores, at a local level, people are beginning to organize within civil society. They're beginning to connect better, at least in some places, with their parliamentarians. So we're beginning to move beyond this debate about is it simply direct democracy or is it representative democracy? It's more about how we get both direct participation, deliberation, and representation working together. It will be a long road. I don't think there's any single easy solution to repairing democratic quality. I think, for me, perhaps the key is to set the expectations of the conference at a reasonable level so people don't think that the conference is going to reinvent democracy or the future of Europe and then get frustrated when it doesn't. So I think if we set our expectations at a modest level, then it can contribute in a tangible and real way to taking these kind of reforms forward.
If I could ask Andrea, I mean, you will have the Zagreb summit, which will discuss this, but also, I mean, since you're in the midst of the Balkans, the question can be raised, will Northern Macedonia or will Montenegro already take part or not? Will they be invited?
Well, it's really, once again, yet to be seen. We are going to have the Zagreb summit to mark 20 years of Zagreb summit in 2000, which really enabled European path of countries on the in Southeast Europe, including Croatia, and Croatia managed to use this opportunity and entered EU. Just to remind ourselves that Croatia started negotiation together with Turkey. And it depends on the dynamics, on the reforms, and on the political will each country has, then it can either reach the final goal or the process takes a little bit longer. What we would really like to make clear on the Western Balkan Summit in Zagreb, that the European perspective of all 6 Western Balkan countries is really reaffirmed and somehow strengthened by this proposed new methodology, which will give a little bit more political impetus to the whole process. Of course, all those conditions and reforms need to be undertaken, but the countries will be somehow motivated strongly on the political level to undertake those reforms, and the benefits from doing it would be even tangible. There is the idea that they could also participate and get benefits from some EU policies once they finalize and close the chapters linked to certain policy. So there are some new ideas, and we are really strongly committed to seize this momentum and move this process forward. And we are really very glad to see that the Commission was in a position to restate that North Macedonia and Albania have done additional progress on their EU path, and we are really hope, as a Croatian presidency, that we will be in a position to find the consensus and reach the agreement very soon, hopefully also this month.
Very good. I look at the audience. I mean, we have raised already many issues, and there are certainly issues which have, as I heard from the applauses, let's say, which have raised controversy. Let's say, I mean, we can take 2 or 3 questions at once. Who wants to kick it off? There's a person at the back there in the middle, colleague Chun, if I see it correctly. Yes?
Yes. Hi, my name is Chun. I'm a researcher at CEPS. My question is, what is the intended result with this conference on the future of Europe? Because if I'm thinking, if the idea is to involve, let's say, everyone, like all the citizens at the local level, to get their opinion, and then to translate that into policy, the first thing I'm thinking about is, do these citizens understand the complexities of the EU itself? If they start bringing up ideas that result in the Commission having to say, sorry, the EU doesn't have the competence to do this, or that the result is that this is an issue that would need a decision by the Council where the Council is not unanimous or does not have the required qualified majority to take that decision. Like, that kind of thing would then result in the kind of frustrations that already at the outset the Conference on the Future of Europe wants to avoid. So my real question is, what is the intended goal? What does the EU, what do the institutions want to achieve with this Conference on the Future of Europe precisely?
Okay, shall I take 1 or 2 other questions? There's a person at the other side. Ah, yeah, there is one left and then one on the right.
Thank you. I'm terrible with names. Sorry about this. Sorry. It seems to me that what
Your name, please?
Sorry, my name is Joanna Bryson, and I'm at the Hertie School. but I might be out of my depth, so maybe I shouldn't drag Hertie into this. It seems to me that what Richard is doing, Richard Young's, when he's saying that there's no citizens at these events, or maybe there should be citizens, or there needs to be democracy, is exactly what Sophie was talking about at the beginning, that is saying that, you know, our representatives are not citizens. And, you know, using that kind of narrative is damaging to the democracy we do have. So I'm happy to say, yeah, let's bring in other information systems, but why undermine the language of democracy and government in doing that?
Okay.
I'm sorry, I gotta say, that's what happened with Brexit too, when all of a sudden we weren't Europeans, the Europeans were those other guys. Yeah, don't compartmentalize that way.
Okay, there's a question on the other side over there, I thought. Yes.
Yes, I'm Funda Tekin from the Institute for European Politics in Berlin. I just wanted to kind of take up also the first question, because I think the key term here is really expectation management. And I wouldn't even go as much into detail as whether they understand the complexity and everything, but it's also the real question whether treaty change is expected or not, or even considered or not. So I think if you rule that out to the begin with, why bother having this conference? If you promise or, you know, kind of raise the expectation of treaty changes, which in the end might not be possible, frustrations might also be high. And I think this is a very risk to consider.
Okay, so 3 very clear questions. André, you want to kick it off? Or, I mean, on the goals, on the involvement on the citizens, and on expectations management?
Yes, I'll try. The first question, yes, it's a very legitimate one, posing a question how detailed, how well informed our citizens can be in advising various aspects of our policies. But I would say that this is exactly why this process is needed. It is almost a two-way process. Through this process, our citizens would learn a little bit more about EU, what really EU is, what the competences are, and I think this will be a win-win situation on all sides, citizens and institutions, thinking and considering how can EU really go forward, and I think this approximately 2 years period would be a really right one to achieve those goals. Treaty changes, yes or no? Let's leave this process to be open, to see what would be the results. And it seems that this is really the right way and the path we should take, not to preclude the outcome of the conference. Thank you.
Sophie?
Mm-hmm. To the first question, do you want an honest answer or a diplomatic one?
A diplomatic one.
Well, diplomatic answer, well, this is meant indeed to educate the citizens or consult them or both. No, look, I think the really rudely honest answer is that I think that the intention of the conference was a distraction. The outcome may well be positive, that I don't know. I hope that my skepticism is unjustified and that in the end there is going to be lots of good ideas, new ideas coming out of the citizens' consultation, things that we had not yet thought of ourselves, and that will then be happily embraced by all the institutions and put in practice.
But Sophie, your party has been promoting this. Your party faction, Verhofstadt, has been promoting this all the time.
Well,
he's carrying this forward.
The beauty of democracy is that we can all have different opinions and we can all look at things from a different perspective. And I'm not necessarily against. All I'm saying that maybe my expectations are slightly more modest than that of some of my party friends. I do have to say, though, because you asked the question earlier, who is going to lead this? Whatever the purpose may have been of this whole thing, if we do put it in the hands of Guy Verhofstadt, I can tell you it's going to be a very vibrant event. But the point is that you say, already here, when you're talking about expectation management, I think the citizens expect to be consulted and then their recommendations to be followed up. But if I hear the council presidency say, well, this is a good opportunity for citizens to learn about Europe, that's already two different things. And I think, quite honestly, I mean, let's not talk about this conference. Everything that could be done today, that should have been done a long time ago, in terms of making the European Union better able to take decisions, better able to act, more transparent, more accountable, that could have been done a long time ago. Why aren't the meetings of the European Council public? All meetings. Why don't you decide in public? Why does the Council refuse so far to include in its minutes the positions of the individual member states? Why does the Council refuse to take decisions with majority voting as required by the treaties? Now, I'm not saying that the Parliament and the Commission and the other institutions are beyond reproach. There's a lot that we as a European Parliament could also improve. But I do think that if you want to meet the citizens' expectations, they expect us to give an answer to the migratory pressures. They expect us to give an answer to the coronavirus. They expect us to give an answer to Trump, to trade wars, to a lot of different challenges. And that is probably what's going to come out of the consultation. But then the question is, how do you best do that?
Sorry.
Can I return to the first question? What is, it is an important question. Is
that's your task, I think, let's say, fill in the goal.
Yeah, fill in the goal. The lady asked, what do you want to achieve with this conference? Huh? Where do you want to land? So if we would know today, and if we would give an answer, a clear answer to that, I think that would be the completely wrong answer, because one of the absolute guiding principles of this conference is it should be openness, yeah. And as the State Secretary said, not to preempt the outcome of this of this whole exercise. And that sounds perhaps a little bit naive, but let me be naive then, and let us first listen to the citizens. And indeed, Sophie, as you said, let's not start by concentrating on the treaty change, as the State Secretary said. Let's concentrate on the main worries, on the main concerns of the citizens, on migration, on Corona, on foreign affairs, on Syria, and etc. And then indeed, it has to be more than just, if one of the by-effects of this conference will be that the citizens will be better informed about the institutions, okay, the better. But that's not the main goal. The main goal is that we should listen to citizens not to the usual suspects, but to the so-called normal people out of the bubble of Brussels, and go out to them in the villages, in the cities, and listen to their concerns. And I'm pretty sure that after some time, you will be able to discern some patterns, yeah, and some common concerns that will come out without any doubt. And let's take them on board. And indeed, let's not do it in a chaotic way. Open doesn't mean chaotic. That means that the Commission and the other institutions and the national parliament should accompany and should give some guidance and make clear, okay, those competences are not the competence of the European Union. And I think citizens are wise enough to understand.
So we go back to Richard, that's its core expertise on how to run this. I mean, and also one issue, are our experiences so bad, as Sophie was saying, let's say, with the transparency of the European democracy?
Well, just on the skepticism about citizens' involvement, I don't think anyone would argue that citizens' participation should delegitimize representative democracy. I don't think it's a panacea. It's not an easy solution that can displace other forms of democracy. But there have been there have been hundreds, if not thousands, of participative experiments run across Europe in recent years, and generally citizens seem to find them useful if they're tailored towards quite specific policy issues and run with a very robust methodology. So I think that there are lessons to be learned there. That, I mean, yes, the EU, the Council needs to take robust positions on the rule of law against states that are not respecting core rights, but there's a more structural issue about improving the way that democracy works and the way that parties and parliaments need to connect down with their citizens, that in some modest way these forms of participation can help. But I come back to the point.
On the methodology of this conference, you have looked at these different systems. What should be the methodology of this conference on the future of Europe? How do you do it?
Well, not to have the question so open-ended that it just becomes unmanageable in terms of what the results are. Not to have the citizens bit of it separate from the parliament, to have parliamentarians and citizens working in tandem with each other, to have different levels of citizen involvement, to try and frame some of the issues not necessarily primarily in terms of the EU institutional reform agenda, but in terms of issues that resonate with people in terms of their everyday lives.
And then you can
I think there's a whole template of fairly basic lessons now that have been learned.
And then you can do it methodology-wise through an e-democracy, because you have analyzed also e-democracy, meaning we can do many consultations in a virtual way.
Well, the e-democracy opens up a whole Pandora's box and another debate. The e-democracy can be good at instilling a kind of responsiveness on the part of citizens. It's not necessarily good in terms of inculcating good quality deliberation. So e-democracy is about accountability, perhaps more than deliberation. So I think it gets very, very complicated, but I think my point would be there's lots of different avenues of improving citizens' democratic connection with decision-making, and all of them have a role to play, and it's about how they all worked, or how they should be working in tandem with each other. But I would come back to the point that I think it's right to say the conference itself is not going to solve all that. That's a huge agenda, and one shouldn't pitch the expectations so high that then we come out of it more disillusioned.
I quickly watch around if there is another question. Otherwise, I mean, there's a question there at the back. I can take one or maximum two more questions. Yes, there's a question here and a question. Yes. Xavier, I mean, yeah, the one in the middle and the one on the left. Yes. Please, brief questions, because we'll have to finish it in 2 or 3 minutes. Yes.
Yes.
Sergio.
Thank you. Sergio Carrera from CEPS. We are talking about a conference on the future of Europe, and from the panel debate, it seems to me that it should be about the present of Europe. The present of Europe, and the risk I'm seeing from our discussions is that this may become a source of Euroscepticism, if indeed we don't deal with the legitimacy expectations that this may create. And if anything we've learned during the last 5 years, is the point of Sophie, the European Parliament has been the only institution that has come with very productive and efficient ways to deal with a migration policy challenge or the rule of law, how to deal with the rule of challenge in Europe, and indeed the European Council has kept it nothing.
Okay, good.
This is a question that...
You support Sophie?
It is a question of democratic legitimacy indeed. If there is a true political commitment to this, then the European Parliament has to have the role is being given in the treaties.
Okay, bigger role for the Parliament, probably a treaty change. Another question here, yes.
Hello, Kurt Bassiner from Democratization Policy Council. Just an observation, but that everybody could react to. It sounds to me, I mean, having lived in the enlargement world for a very long time, I've been used to hearing that governments need to take ownership of policies, ownership. What this sounds like is sort of, the conference is being set up as a shock absorber. It's sort of a shell game. If governments are supposed to take ownership of their citizens understanding how the EU works, especially if they've been member states forever, then this seems like a way to try to deflect responsibility from that governmental obligation on their part. So I'm just curious what you think about that and whether you think I've got that right.
Thank you. I turn back to the panel and then we close this session. So, Andrea, something specific?
I would say that those two processes, of course, it is the responsibility of government also to inform their citizens and to liaise with them and to listen what their inputs are. This Conference of Future Europe can just be a synergy to this primarily effort of each and every member state it has.
And there is no support in the Council to give the Parliament more of a role? The European Parliament?
I would not even comment to that kind of...
Sophie will certainly do this?
Yes, I'm almost speechless now. But no, I think you made the point beautifully, because, look, where are those citizens getting their information on the European Union? Largely from or through national channels. I mean, I find it very ironic that everybody is going completely hysterical over fake news coming from Russia, but you don't need to go as far as Russia. Just listen to what Mr. Orban is saying, or the Prime Minister of Poland, or indeed even the Prime Minister of my country, who is slightly more moderate than Mr. Orban in his language on Brussels, but they all engage in Brussels bashing. At one, except for maybe Mr. Macron, who is the only one who's speaking sort of fondly of the European Union. all the others are engaging in Brussels bashing, Europe bashing, spreading fake news, lies and disinformation about the European Union. And then, you will get the same as in the UK. If you feed people nonsense for decades, they end up believing it. So how is this conference? I mean, again, I'm not saying I'm
the role of the media as well, Sophie. That's sometimes the role of the media.
The media also listen to national politicians being authorities. If a prime minister says something, then people tend to believe it. And if again, and Orban is of course he's been campaigning against Brussels, and a lot of national politicians, and some are a bit more moderate and constructive than others, at least in their language, but they all engage in Brussels bashing because it's so convenient for national politics. So how is this conference going to resolve that problem?
Through more consultation probably, but anyway, I pass the floor to Ivo on...
Yeah, on those two questions,
I think. Of the Parliament, for example.
The second one was on shock absorber, and about the leaders having to take ownership. Of course, they have to do, but at the same time, that is in your brochure, centrally in the brochure of these labs. There's the turnout of the European elections and the participation rate, as you said, Secretary. The high turnout and the participation of young people in European elections. There's the clear demand of citizens to have a say, to participate also between the two ballot box moments. And that's exactly what we want to do, to involve citizens. And of course, then at a certain moment, those recommendations come to the ones who have to take ownership, meaning the three institutions together with the national parliaments. The other question was on Euroscepticism. You're going to bring Euroscepticism on the podium centrally in Brussels or wherever in Europe. We shouldn't be afraid of that. We shouldn't be afraid of the debate. Brexit happened, I shouldn't say because of the fact that we stayed away from the debate in the UK. We should have gone in and go for the debate and not be afraid of the opinion of the citizens.
Richard, final point? Or almost final
point? I think Sergio made a really good point about Euroscepticism, and on the relationship between Euroscepticism and democracy. There's an interesting kind of paradox in a way that, I mean, it's true that many people fear opening up democratically too much because that may give more oxygen to illiberal, populist, Eurosceptic forces. But then there is the more positive case where many people, I mean, there's decades of evidence that suggests that if deliberation is done well, it can smooth some of the rougher edges of people's views and at least help to mitigate polarization to some extent. It's not a cure-all, it's not a magical solution, but done in the right way, it can get people more proactively engaged in politics. In fact, as we sit here, in France, the citizens going through the last day of the climate assembly. And again, that seems to have worked in terms of getting people more positively engaged. So there is that kind of paradox that populism and Euroscepticism is both driving this search for better democratic participation, but also in a way it's acting as a brake on it. So it's a kind of analytical paradox. Maybe the truth is somewhere between the two. But I do think certainly it highlights the issue that if the EU is to open up to citizens, then the consequences can't be predetermined too much, because that would kind of negate the whole purpose of doing the exercise at all. But my final point would perhaps be just to de-link some of these democracy issues a bit from the conference itself, because I think if the danger is if the conference becomes dominated by debates between the different institutions, then citizens may get squeezed out of the script a bit.
Okay, thank you very much. And with this, I close this panel. Thanks a lot, let's say, for listening, for your attention, for your question, and above all, thanks a lot for the panel. Thanks a lot for Andrea, Sophie, Ivo, and Richard for, I think, was a very lively discussion, a very lively starting shot for this conference on the future of Europe. So this is the formal closing end of this conference of our Ideas Lab. We now have the academic lecture by Harold James. Daniel is coming up. Daniel will introduce him in a moment. It will be basically about the same issue, so if you want to stay on, please stay with us. But that was the formal open closing plenary. So thank you very much again to the panel.